Today, we bring you the first part of our two-part special series, Civilization and Imagination, a glimpse of China's path. Today's episode will focus on civilization. We invite a panel of esteemed guests that includes sitting and former world leaders and scholars. Together, we uncover how the wisdom of China's unbroken written civilization can be an asset to guide China's modernization.
What role does a nation's cultural heritage have in its modern development? What lessons can we learn from how civilizations and cultures interacted through the ages?
They have a diverse societies, multi-ethnic and multi-confessional societies.
It's our field. We have to play with this and to show how it all is interconnected.
Can ancient wisdom resolve today's challenges?
China has shown over centuries its ability to adapt, but continuity requires a very wide variety of various adaptations.
What are the characteristics of Chinese culture?
But amazingly is that I feel I belong to China and there's no distance.
Because I was curious about China's culture and I was curious about China's perspective on the world.
And welcome to CGTN special program.
Tune in to our special program, Civilization and Imagination, a glimpse of China's path.
Hello and welcome to CGTN special program, Civilization and Imagination, a glimpse of China's path. I'm your host, Tian Wei. Human history moves forward with encounters and interactions of diverse civilizations. Among them, the Chinese civilization, which has enjoyed one of the longest histories in the world. So, what comes to your mind when you think about Chinese culture? How do you understand Chinese civilization? Today, we are joined by cultural leaders, scholars, politicians, and key opinion leaders from all over the world. Let's celebrate the Chinese culture and civilization, as well as mutual learning among all of us. First, insights from these gentlemen. Ilham Aliyev, President of Azerbaijan.
The countries which were situated on the ancient Silk Road, one of their, specifics or similarity is that they have a diverse societies, multi-ethnic and multi-confessional societies, and Azerbaijan is part of that positive scenario. Therefore, cultural heritage of Azerbaijan, as you can see with your own eyes, is something which is duly protected by our state, and for us it is a asset which we need to keep, preserve, and hand over to new generations. Therefore, definitely we will continue to preserve our cultural heritage, which is part of the world heritage. And at the same time, more connectivity projects with partners will lead to more visits, more tourists, more trade, more interaction, and that will only make richer our culture and our society.
Next, Mikhail Piotrovsky, director of the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. It's one of the 4 largest museums in the world.
We're talking about the Chinese ballet, now the best after Russia, Russian ballet in the world. But also there are differences in understanding and how it plays, what is a part of it in Chinese culture, in American culture, and so on. So it's our field. We have to play with this and to show how it all is interconnected. And that makes it beautiful. One thing again, different is beautiful. Now we have so many new perfect museums around the world, outside of Europe. Look at the Gulf, look at China when you have, well, every year 100 new museums coming out. And they're not only museums of traditional Chinese art, they're museums of modern art, museum of Western art, and so there are a lot of things. So it's a lot. There are a lot of possibilities of working together, and we have just need a little bit of more peace, a little bit of more stability in financial exchanges and insurances and so on, so we can make a lot of very active exchanges and working together. So I think importance of your own culture must be always connected with understanding it belongs to the world, and to study all these interconnections, how it works, how it takes to mutual benefits.
Now, Mr. Mahmoud Abbas, President of the State of Palestine.
We fully agree with the initiatives related to development and security proposed by China. I believe that these initiatives will be successful. Many countries worldwide will welcome these initiatives, as no other country has put forward similar initiatives. When China puts forth these initiatives, the world knows that China has no ulterior motives and does not seek private gain from them. The entire world will welcome these initiatives. What leaves the deepest impression on me is China itself as a country. China not only has a long history and splendid civilization, but it is also constantly achieving its own development, with its national strength on the rise. China possesses not only a storied past, but a dynamic present and a promising future. Once the Chinese government sets a development goal, it will make utmost efforts to achieve it. Chinese people also strongly support the government's work. The national image of China is endearing and respectable. China will achieve even greater success on its development path.
And I'm so honored to introduce our panelists, both online and in person, in this discussion. Joining us from Slovenia, Danilo Turk, former president of Slovenia, now president of the Club de Madrid. Mr. President, good to see you. Zhumart Otobayev, former prime minister of Kyrgyz Republic. Mr. Prime Minister.
Hello, Tian Wei, good to see you.
Also joining us here in the studio, Ms. Han Hua, president of Beijing Belt and Road Cooperative Community. Good to see you, Ms. Han.
Thanks for having me.
From the US, David Moser, sinologist and linguist.
Thank you.
Good to see you, David. Joining us online from the US, Peter Dietmanson, professor of history from the Department of History with Yuelu Academy, now based in Hunan province. Good to see you, Peter, again. From France, Pierre Bicard, who is the founder and president of CEDRIC, Center for Studies with the Development and International Research on China. From Malaysia, in her beautiful costume, Claudia Yang, artistic director of Silk Road International Cultural Exchange Center. She herself is an established pianist. Thank you so much, Claudia. And from Pakistan, Zun Ahmad Khan, research fellow from the Center for China and Globalization. Now, as we know, earlier in the speech given by the Chinese President Xi Jinping, he talked about the characteristics of Chinese civilization. Now, President Turk, there are several words that he mentioned: continuity, innovation, unity, inclusiveness, and also peace.
Continuity is actually the most interesting aspect of this continuity. Now, China has a very long history, the oldest civilization which is developing further. And then, of course, the question of continuity opens up also the aspect of adaptability. I would say continuity in connection with the ability of an old civilization to adapt to modern needs, to new times, to requirements of, in our case, 21st century. So I would choose continuity, it being understood that continuity requires a very wide variety of various adaptations. And, China has shown over centuries its ability to adapt. It was not always adequate, but now with the hindsight of the past 2 or 3 centuries, China has found a very interesting and a very promising method of adaptation. And I believe that that's really a very good promise for the world as a whole.
Yes. What about for you, Mr. Prime Minister?
I would like to say another word, which is history. written history in the books which still historians are discovering new facts, new ideas. So this is unique, and this work to be continued in the future. The longer its history is, the more interesting it is. If you look to the books, then only in the last maybe 9-10 centuries, human beings understanding relatively well its history. But in Chinese archives, there is a treasury of the new books. Recently, what I heard that just last year, new artifacts were found where it's written that my nation, Kyrgyz, were in contact with China 2,200 years ago. Mm-hmm. Only a few years ago, we considered that we start our contacts during the Han Dynasty. But it's happened that it was much earlier, which is fantastic.
Professor Dittmanson, what about for you? Among all these key words, which you find dearest to your heart?
Well, I also believe that they are all important and all interconnected. I think I would, for this current discussion, I would pick the concept of inclusion, which has many meanings, many ways of thinking about it. I think in terms of China's diversity. And in studying Chinese history, one of the things that we find is that China is, over the course of its history, a very diverse place with contributions from many different types of people, many different subcultures that we can still see today in various parts of China. The other part of inclusiveness that I think is important to think about is that it presents an ongoing challenge in China. How do we create a more inclusive and a more diverse society? This is a challenge that we face here in America. As most people know, diversity and inclusion is a very contentious and debated issue in American culture right now. And this is because it's very difficult for us to imagine how we can make our society more diverse, more inclusive, and more fair. And I believe the same challenges face China as well and face most parts of the world. So that would be the term that I would use today.
What about for you, Mr. Piquois? Which keyword would you choose from where you are?
Well, I could say that since I knew China 25 years ago, it was step by step at every travel for me a real dream to know your country, your civilization, and also the efforts of your governments and of the Communist Party.
Mr. President, President Turk, as you know, our own civilizations does not just exist on our own. We interact and also intertwine, communicate with other culture and civilizations as well. How much do we see from others about ourselves could actually help us to understand better about ourselves in a way?
As I said before, I think the key here is adaptability and innovation. And of course, China has demonstrated its capacity to innovate and to adapt, particularly in the last few decades. So there is a potential there, and it's proven. It's not something imagined. It's a proven capacity to take advantage of its long history, long continuity, which has always been linked to adaptation. And of course, the demands of adaptation today are different from what they were in history, although, for example, the ancient Greece and ancient China existed at about the same time, two millennia ago, and obviously there was very little interaction and very little adaptation to each other. But now the situation is different. And of course, one has to start with technology. In technology, China has shown incredible capacity to adapt and to interact with the rest of the world. I think the most important aspect today is to take advantage of what has been achieved and add to this, first of all, political understanding, political, how should I say, responsibility. And that, of course, is not only a task for China. I mean, it's a task for everybody else. We all have to behave responsibly to each other.
I know Professor did mention you have been doing research about Chinese history, especially the history of Ming Dynasty. So may I invite your insight here as to how we learn about our own history and culture from others' eyes could help us to understand better about ourselves.
Yes, thank you. That is a very big question. I think one of the ways in which outsiders can make a contribution to the study of Chinese history and culture is to think about the ways in which our past overlap, are similar or are different, and the ways in which that leads to modern times in which we face similar types of problems and conditions. So, for example, in the Ming Dynasty, we study issues like urbanization or the circulation of information or the development of public health or the relations between the genders, all of which are complicated problems in European history and American history and Indian history and so on. And so I think thinking of Chinese history and problems in the context of world history sort of opens up new venues and new creative ways for thinking about how China has changed over time.
While you are talking about this, I almost feel myself walking in the streets of Ming Dynasty in China, going with you to experience all different aspects of the society then. That would be really cool. David, if I could, because everybody is talking about how difficult it is to understand the other cultures. For example, Chinese culture and Chinese civilization. But one would assume there have been hundreds of years of interaction of one kind or another. Why this has always been the topic and has always been consistently been challenging?
Well, I think Chinese for the West represents a kind of a challenge, which is seeing a way of looking at the world, a way of looking at governance, society, gender roles, family especially, a very different way of looking at the world. China is probably the best example of a civilization that developed and evolved almost somewhat independently of the West. So they were not a seafaring country. They were an isolated island, a continental country. And so for us, a lot of the problem was just getting into this mysterious country to understand their culture and how they created their own culture. I think that's always been a challenge. But once we started to do that and begin to interact, with some skirmishes along the way, what we find out as we learn more and more about China as a Westerner, what we learn about China and its development, is that, as you said, the differences loom large at the beginning, but as you get a deeper understanding, the similarities come out.
When was that moment for you?
I think with humor.
Yeah?
When I was studying Chinese humor, yes. I found out that the first feeling when you see Chinese humor is, why are they laughing? I don't get it. I don't get the joke. But as you begin to live there and experience it, you begin to get the joke. And as you begin to become more Chinese, you laugh at the same thing. And you realize you're laughing at the same joke. And that joke was always there. It has to do with human frailty, human commonality, contradictions, personality types. It's the same thing.
Yeah. Claudia, same question to you. Why? I mean, you are coming from Malaysia. Chinese culture is very much vibrant there. But why still in Malaysia and in other parts of Asia, there is a challenge to understand our own culture and that of the others?
Well, actually, I'm a very good example of this diversity. And I think in Malaysia, it's a very multi-ethnic, multicultural, multilingual country. Now I live in China, I'm based in China, and I really study and learn in the past 20 years I would say, the most authentic Chinese culture. Maybe I could have learned it wrongly, in my childhood. But amazingly is that I feel I belong to China, and there's no distance between Malaysia and China. I would say that. And especially I married with a Beijing man, and my mother tongue is Mingnan Hua. Mingnan. I'm originally from Xiamen. I was born there. I'm the 4th generation. So to me, I do not feel like when I came to China, I'm not a stranger, and really, I would say it from my bottom of my heart, I belong to here. Surprisingly, when we talk about the first questions, to me, innovation, it's the most exciting, and it means a lot to me as a musician, actually. Yep.
Zun, for you, how do you see this continuous difficulty and fascination we have about the Chinese culture?
I came to Beijing for the first time in 2015 because I was curious about China's culture and I was curious about China's perspective on the world. Increasingly, over these 8 years, what I realized is that China is very diverse. Chinese people understand their history in a way, like even David mentioned and a few others, that few civilizations, few countries, few cultures have been able to preserve that history. So there is an aspect of continuity. And I think an increasing fascination about China, especially among developing countries, be they in Asia, Africa, Latin America, is also because how far China has come in a span of decades. So there was always respect and understanding of ancient Chinese civilization. We all grew up, decades ago even, knowing about the Silk Road, knowing about how phenomenal that period was. But in today's time, China has managed to develop itself at a speed, scale, and scope that is unprecedented. And I think there's a newer curiosity to understand what is this all about. So quick example, I think it's also how well China has managed its own diverse self. And this is something that's also increasingly a question I'm trying to understand. How does such diversity create synergy?
I really like the way you put it, that there are layers of curiosity already piled up, not only about China's ancient history, but also how China has become where it is today, especially over the past few decades. What does that say about Chinese culture, right? So let's go to Ms. Han. Hua, you travel around the world. How do you see what I just asked everybody, this continuous curiosity about Chinese culture, yet it seems to continuous challenge the situation about how to understand that for the rest of the world?
In my opinion, it is a result of many subcultures rooted in this land and rooted for this land. So within about 3 sentences, you may have similar experience that within 3 sentences when you're meeting some new friends in China, we just can't help but asking, where are you from? I was born in Hangzhou and I was raised in Shanghai, and then I moved to Beijing after university graduation. So it is for me to adapt to different mini cultures within China. China is so huge. China poses many opportunities, but at the same time, it is even for a Chinese like me, some difficulties when I just want to be a southerner, adapting to a Beijing culture at the very beginning when I moved here. So this is also the beauty, as well as the challenges, as well as the opportunities.
Thank you so much. I love all of your interpretations to give us a good impetus to continue our discussion. Having said that, though, I think we need to figure out something. Now, tremendous curiosity about Chinese culture throughout history. Meanwhile, we can be mutual learning from one another, while at the same time mutually inspiring to one another. So here comes the question, how can we do that? I think that is probably the most important. So, President Turk, coming back to you, you raised the question in a way, from your own perspective. So what can we do now to increase these kinds of real quality communication about Chinese culture, Chinese civilization? What are some of the brilliant ideas you right now have in your mind, sir?
Look, there are certain basic things which have to be done. I'm very unhappy when I hear that there are countries in the West who are closing the Confucius institutes in different cities, universities, and so forth. I think this is very unfortunate. We have a Confucius Institute in Ljubljana, and it has become quite an important center of mutual cultural exchange. And I think that these basic things have to continue. They shouldn't be closed. But your question is, of course, more ambitious. It is about what would be the trick, what should be the trick. Well, if one looks into the history of, let's say, cultural developments between East Asia and Europe, just take this example. I mean, Japanese movies of Akira Kurosawa were extremely important in that context. The movies which were about the traditional Japan, but brought that closer to Europe. So cinema is an incredibly important source. And of course, China has done some of that, but I think that there is more to happen. I mean, Chinese movie industry should be much more ambitious, much more, I shouldn't say aggressive, but ambitious in the sense that it presents stories, pictures to the West.
Having said that, though, we have brilliant minds here sitting in the audience as well, because they are university students coming from all over the world. We have a real diversity and inclusiveness in this room. I would love to also have your ideas. What are some brilliant ideas you have in terms of how would you be able to communicate Chinese culture and Chinese civilization, as big a word as that, to your peers, to your friends?
My name is Kati Tuihalanginge. I am from the Kingdom of Tonga, located in the South Pacific. My idea would be sharing Chinese culture and civilization with my people through a meal, introducing the Chinese cuisines and the food. Maybe this would help us bring ourselves together by sharing our food of my people to China, as well as sharing the Chinese cuisines to my people.
That's a brilliant idea. I would love to be invited every time when you do that. What about other ideas? Please, that young lady, go ahead.
I'm Yang Zhi, and I'm from China, but I did study abroad in UK. So I think that today when I speak about the Chinese civilization, that I will show my friends around me, I think I would definitely choose like Chinese ink paint, because I'm studying art. So that I think that I would definitely take my friends to go see a Chinese National Museum, because I think there's lots of similarity between the Chinese ink paint and also the foreign like oil paint. Because I have studied a lot, so I think it's about Morandi paintings exhibition that the show in Beijing. So I think that when I research about the Morandi painting, George Morandi from Italy, and I know that the way that he painted the steel objects is actually inspired by Qi Baishi's, like the way how he paint the steel objects, because we can know that actually Morandi has absorbed lots of inspiration, like the Chinese, like really traditional object, like the vases, the bottles, and actually there also is a, how to say, like they combine together. It's a combination between the different cultures.
Right. You're watching our special program, Civilization and Imagination, a glimpse of China's past.